Welcome to Canvas of the Heart, presented by Free Arts for Abused Children of Arizona. The mission of Free Arts is to transform children's trauma to resilience through the arts. This show is a collection of conversations that spotlight the ways Free Arts creates hope for children and teens who've experienced abuse, neglect, or homelessness. We hope you find this show to be informative, inspiring, and fun. Hi, everyone. It's Matt. I'm here today. It's just me, but that's okay. I want to take some time here to do an important thing. We want to talk about skills that we all need as mentors, volunteers, and adults, free arts adults that care about our community and the populations that we serve. We all have some essential things in common, and today's episode's about navigating a really complex inner world, a space that really only you know in its full texture and your experience. And one of the secrets to living is realizing that we're all walking around with this inner world full of thoughts and feelings, some that are shared, some that are kind of secret, things that we're afraid of, things that we're proud of. And these motivate our behavior at very strong levels and at important times in our life. So to ground us here in this idea of navigating this inner world, I want to start with some basic facts about being human. So number one, we know that humans are evolving, not only socially and culturally, but the body that we inhabit is full of different processes, biological, neurological, that contribute to our way of understanding our space, our environment, our interactions. It's always monitoring our environment, often for safety. And these are all things shared with other living beings, and we are connected in that way. But humans have a bit more going on. We have extra thinking abilities and processes happening as part of our brain. So we have the monitoring system, and we also have a very complex thinking system. And that adds to more awareness of self, awareness of potential dangers, but also potential rewards. And these are a little unlike other living beings. And this complex kind of soup of life is something that we're all trying to navigate and make sense of. What's true about humans, number two, is that they are relational. As much as we like to think about our own independence and our own needs, we are a we before an I. When we are born, we are dependent on caregivers. We are interdependent as children around our caregivers, teachers, and other adults. And then as we grow in the workplace and in school, life is a lot easier to handle if you have one close and important connection, because we are dialed to connect and to attune and to be mirrored and to have other people understand us and for us to understand others. So we're evolving, we're relational, and number three, we have volition. We have this need to exercise choice. And in fact, situations where that ability to have choice can be very stressful, traumatic, and severe in its adversity and its effects on us, such that at Free Arts, we talk a lot about giving choice where choice can be exercised. What kinds of art, what kinds of interactions, what feels safe, what can we engage in when we're doing our work with mentors and our participants. The fourth element is intellectual, right? We are thinking, we are processing, we write books, we have abstract thinking abilities, we can forecast and create worlds. We enjoy these things in movie form and in book form. We can even create abstract concepts and force you to take out monetary resources, sometimes even loans, to get a college degree. We've created all those systems with this ability for us to think at a high level. And these all combine to a really important last element of what's true about being human, is that our brains, our bodies are monitoring space and trying to find shortcuts. And so that means we look for patterns. This sounds and feels like this. As we were prepping for today, we were talking here as we set up the podcast space about the music we were playing and how it sounds like this and that, because our brains take in new data. And I was playing music I had heard for the first time last night in here, and I enjoyed it. And part of what was sounded good is the singer sounds like Bob Dylan and George Harrison kind of fused together. Well, when I heard new music, I went to prior experience and I put that together to say, oh, is this like this? And it was. And in a way, I like the sound of somebody who's fused Bob Dylan and George Harrison. Others may not. That's a pattern you may not like. But what's true about being human is we make patterns, we look for them. Often this is a shortcut and it's helpful. Other times it could be a shortcut that's telling us false information. And that can be a difficult thing about being human. So all of these facts, evolving, relational, volitional, being intellectual, and recognizing that our brain seeks and creates patterns can all add up to say, yay, that's great. We're humans. This is an enjoyable thing, except for another feature, which is that our mind is always creating thought, creating narrative constantly, even if we want it to stop. If you've been to any effort to meditate, to sit quietly, I remember one time somebody said, we're going to do a moment of silence. It's going to be a minute long. It lasted 12 seconds, right? Because sitting alone with your own thoughts can seem like it's going on forever because there's a lot happening here. I remember the old VH1 show. This is kind of a cultural reference for those with a little bit more wrinkles and gray hair with pop-up video. So it was a TV show that had like facts about the video popping up. And our brains function this way. At a really uncontrolled level, it's been called the monkey mind, that it's kind of highly energetic, grabbing this, grabbing that, kind of being erratic, full of energy, and a little distracting. And the trouble with this kind of thinking is that it is totally natural, and it is likely that most people without some insight and some guidance take it to be the only way they can think and experience their environment. And there's some trouble with this monkey mind is our brain is constantly making thought in the same way other organs are making the things that they make. Pancreas, making insulin, right? Our lungs handling the processing of oxygen with and without our permission. We are glad for both of those processes. Our brain makes thought in the same way. And our brain creates this idea of mind, which is our ability to focus, our sense of energy. It is the place where we notice sensation, whether it is warm or it's cool. And I'm in Arizona, which means I know all about heat and warmth. And we are like very excited when it finally cools off a bit. Mind tells us all of these things are important to us. It is also a flow space for dialogue. We have an internal narrative that's constantly going for us. And it is happening all the time that we are alive, not just when we're awake, but we're alive, right? You didn't know you were thinking when you're sleeping. You don't think in the true, full fashion that you do when you're awake. But we've all had the experience of dreaming. And I had some vivid dreams last night that are really not important for the podcast, but probably you had some too. We have this process of our brain being online. If it's getting sugar, if it's getting glucose, if it's getting oxygen, it is creating thought. And so as these thoughts collide and this tendency to have like an erratic, wild, energetic monkey mind happening, there's some parts of us that have evolved over time to kind of be a buffer against that. And for safety reasons, our mind is biased against negative things. It wants to warn us. And it's biased to believe warnings a little bit more than it is to believe encouraging or praiseworthy things. So if you've been through a recent stressor, if you've had an experience of something that is really challenging and you feel like the world's coming down on you, that is how our brain is structured to take things around us at a very serious and high level. And it's to keep you safe. It's to keep you safe. And this bias of our brain to kind of overweight the warning makes our mind feel like a real harsh critic. Think about the movie critic who likes nothing about that movie and they're making fun of it. This is often the texture of the narrative that we have for us. And so the difficulty for us is that as a species, for a long time, this was kind of shared knowledge that the mind is is a little wild and erratic, and you had like branches of philosophy like Stoicism trying to recognize that. 5,000 years of meditation practice coming out of India in Buddhist traditions, trying to understand that we can have some coexistence with mind without feeling attached to these things. And then in more recent times, more of a clinical approach that's been tested with audiences of people just like you and me to see, can we take a different perspective and posture around our thinking patterns? And some of these kind of cognitive strategies, these thinking-based strategies, help us to see how thinking is natural and typical, but also perhaps at different moments, not helpful, not motivating, not comforting, and to help us see that bias, that in this moment, you're more inclined to see this negative than you are the positive. Is that the only way to see this situation? But the reality is we all carry with us an inner critic. And that inner critic has some sounds very distinct. It's the inner critic that tells us, what if the worst thing happens? What if on the way home I get into an accident? What if a loved one gets sick? What if, what if, what if? And if you play this game long enough, everything in your life could have an unfortunate what if that is just around the corner. And what's troublesome about living is that we have challenging things happen to us throughout our lives. And so some of the what ifs end up being true, but the vast majority, not so much. But our mind, that critic, is there to say, what if you try and you fail? What if you put yourself out there into a new situation and nobody likes you? What if you get involved at Free Arts as a mentor and it's overwhelming to you because you're working with the wrong age group, or you're not sure that your art is strong enough? By the way, there's no requirement that you're an artist to be part of what we do at Free Arts. I'm simply pointing out the way that even when we're involved in something we care about deeply, this what if function starts to take place, starts to be kind of harsh about our intentions. Another way that an inner critic shows up is should. Any sentence starting with should. I should be perfect. I should be more like this. I should be prettier. I should be fatter. I should be skinnier. I should be... And you could put any kind of descriptor at the end of that should. Somebody is walking around feeling it. Even if the rest of the audience is like, can you believe it? You're delightful. You're wonderful. You're funny. You're talented. But should is in this place of us raising up to some standard that we've often set up for ourselves, because a third way that our inner critic shows up is kind of as a judgmental bully. Many of you listening to this probably have the experience of recognizing nobody else is going to be as hard on you as you will about yourself, leading into the event, during the event, and after the event. And these are very typical human experiences. We also have some expectations that we'll never make mistakes and that we can know everything. And so even when something goes off track, the instant human tendency is to find blame in ourselves, blame in others, as if any one of us is really as powerful as we would like to be, and that any of us owns both a clear picture of the present, an accurate rendering of the past, and some kind of crystal ball that tells us what the future could be like, and that we should be taking the following actions to be ready for it. This inner critic also starts to emphasize differences rather than commonalities. And so this is an important part of like diversity and equity discussion, is that we all look around to see how we fit in, and often noting in the spaces in which things are different than our own prior experience with a judgmental stance. And what we're trying to learn to do as a human race is to understand that there are a lot more shared commonalities about our own needs, about our wishes, about being alive and what that can mean to enjoy that fact, than there are to highlight the differences that might exist in somebody's background, their talent level. This comes out often in the artwork, right? We say at Free Arts, no mistakes in art. We are definitely saying as a mantra that we're going to come here, our mind's going to have a tendency to compare, and that here there aren't mistakes in a way that, oh, this didn't come out the way I liked it. Well, how do we work with what's on that palette in this project, whatever the performance might be? How do we work with it rather than think, oh, all hope is lost, we've failed to live up to perfection? We're hearing that as a critic, And we're trying to challenge that prevailing view that you should be perfect. We'd want you to just to be human and to embrace that. And that's what we hold in common.
Every time you donate to Free Arts, something amazing happens. How? Let's paint a picture. Each penny we receive helps us deliver trauma-informed arts programs in a safe space where children can express themselves. We partner with more than 40 different child welfare agencies, a community that reaches over 17,000 children annually. So when you give, you help us turn trauma into resilience. Visit freeartsaz.org to donate and transform countless lives today.
The harsh critic loves to argue. So some of you are nodding your head going, yeah, I could hear this message. I understand it. I'm still going to do it. And yeah, that's that critic coming out right now to say, yeah, Matt might have a few points here, but what if he's wrong? He should be quiet about this topic. I should do something else with my time rather than continue to listen to this. This is how mind works. And it also places us in a place where we're ready to respond or we're ready to take action. And that's what could feel like nervousness and tension, is that these thinking patterns are motivating behavior. And so that energy in our body gets stored up. But I'm thankful for a couple of things. As people started to think about what thinking strategies could help people, a couple people noticed that some of the prevailing thinking strategies didn't work as well as one might wish. And they noticed that, first of all, that if we only think about fixing our thoughts only by ourselves, we're ignoring very important relational needs. And that's an important dynamic of being human, of being connected, and of living with others, is that we, yes, have these solo experiences of our own thinking patterns, but we're also constantly interfacing with other people in a space where, because of this negative bias, we're often being harsher to ourselves or being a little more limited in the way that we are engaging with other people. And so that's causing our relationships to be a little bit more limited than they could be, when the benefit of being a little more open, a little more vulnerable, a little more human is that we might be better connected. And so the second limit also is the fact that if we focus on thinking only, we tend to fuse ourselves to that thought rather than see it as separate, as distinct, as something that is floating by. It's almost like if you don't like stormy weather and tonight it rains, a very immature way of seeing that is that, oh, it's raining and it's always going to rain and it always rains when I want to do stuff. That feels that way, but that's not technically true. But with thinking and focusing only on thought patterns and not our connections and our needs to attune to others, we get more glued to the way we're thinking, not less. And so what we want to do is create some spaces to be more connected to others, more vulnerable with this human experience, and more open to input that might challenge some of these harsh self-statements, these criticisms that we carry for each other. So relationships influence us on important levels, because to be in relationship requires us to be open, and it requires us to have some risk around whether this relationship will be good for us and whether this person or persons that we care about could hurt us. So there is a dynamic in relationship that prompts vulnerability. As I share, as I am open, I am now subject to someone else's monkey mind, their own harsh critics, both in the things they say, both in the continuation of that relationship, but also in reading their expressions and understanding how they're showing up for us. We create narratives about whether we're accepted by others all the time. And this is a dynamic of relationship. So it's kind of wild that the very thing we need is the thing that gets scarier when we get closer to it. And this was something pointed out by Jean Baker Miller in Relational Cultural Theory. And this was a critique of those early thinking strategies. And it's called the central relational paradox, which is basically the closer we get to connection, the more prone we are to hide. So if you notice that, if there's a relationship to you that feels good, that is becoming more intense, stronger, and has more meaning for you, what's going to come along with it is some sense that this can't be true. I should bounce out of here. I can't take this risk. It's going to come with it. And this is an essential part of us as relational creatures that are both needing to be attached to others, attuned to it, but also wired to look for safety and to recognize that our bias is to believe that everything's out of control and I need to solve it and I need to start right now. So if you're listening to this, if you're part of the free arts community, you're a helper. You have realized that there's some value in recognizing the needs of others. It is totally okay to recognize that there is a personal gain in serving others, right? I do this professionally. I understand that my constructed sense of meaning out of living is in giving back to others, helping others grow. But because you're here and you're listening to this, you're very much dedicated to the same kinds of ideals. And so what we're trying to encourage here in this discussion is as we engage in our work as a staff person, as a volunteer, as a mentor, as a free arts person out in the world who's just keeping tabs on what we're doing here, we all have this opportunity to engage at a deeper level with one another, and to also recognize that even as we serve others who are in their own process of growth and healing, so are we. And an important boundary is we're not taking our stuff and making participants, children, solve it for us, but it's going to come along with us. And some of the thinking and pattern that we're used to might show up in our work. And so we'll have more discussions about this in different episodes in the future. But we want to encourage here thinking about our inner world in a way, navigating it with the most amount of flexibility. We're not going to shut off thought. We're not going to shut off feeling. We're not even going to necessarily promise that we can let go of all past memories, particularly of hurtful and harmful things. Those memories serve as some guideposts to us. And as much as a thing like fear is unpleasant, fear becomes a North Star. We can guide by it. We can guide. When we feel fear, inside us is a sense that we need to be connected, to be attuned to other people. And I would encourage you to think about who those people are, to deepen those relationships, to have the kind of conversations that are just honest and say, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling worried. And for us to be the type of people who can respond to that very vulnerable statement with, I'm here right now with you, supporting you, listening. I believe in you. Not judging people for having the fear, not telling them it should just go away or that it's silly, but recognizing that that fear comes with us, but it's also the North Star that tells us it's time to connect, which is very similar to the feeling that any of our participant children, teens, or families will have often when they first approach a free arts program. So, in conclusion, we're thinking about feelings. We've thought about our bodies, our neurology a little bit, leading into our thinking patterns. And I want to point to the work of Magda Arnold, who, before we had MRIs and fancy neurological scans, basically got our feeling processes right. And Magda Arnold talked about the appraisal theory of emotion. And that basically means that at any moment, as we navigate our time in our day, in the spaces that we operate in and live in, we are navigating a sense of feeling safe or unsafe. How safe am I feeling? And how much fear am I experiencing? And those feelings motivate action. They motivate behavior. And that sense of fear, that sense of safety is kind of the basic kernel that blooms into what we call emotion. So all emotions come back to this sense of how connected am I? How safe am I? And in order to make sense of our emotions, she talked about a 5-step process. So when we are having feelings, when we're having experiences affecting our senses, that it's appropriate to stop and to say, what is the cue to this? The other word we use for this often is trigger. What has triggered this, right? You can have triggering or cue type moments in both directions. You smell your favorite snack, you're thinking about your snack, right? You walk by the coffee shop, now you're suddenly in line, right? You've been cued up by environment to remind you of something pleasant. We also have cues that remind us of things that are scary or fearful. So recognizing what that cue is, it could be tone, it could be a situation, it could be a memory. It could be a holiday or an occasion. Depending on the episodes of our lives, we might have acute moments where we're very aware of loss or hurt because a frequently noted date to our lives is coming around the corner. So as that cue or that trigger happens, we quickly, biologically start to assess how safe we are. And that causes us to take some action, right? That's why we tense up. We close our fists. We start to take these postures of either running away, getting ready to fight, getting ready to play, to fawn, to give in, to placate anything that might be a threat to us. And this is the biological wired-in response. This happens to everyone and in any creature that has a developed neurological system. When that cue hits, biology says you better handle this danger. The gift of our upper thinking processes is once we notice biology is motivated, I'm feeling like I need to fight, I'm feeling like I need to get out of here, we can ask ourselves, what is the real danger here? How dangerous is it? Doesn't mean the feelings are going to necessarily dissipate instantly, but am I in this space here in a good spot? Am I with someone that can tend to me, to listen, to just sit with? And this is why sometimes in this moment, logic isn't the best approach, right? Convincing somebody. It's just a pure assessment of how much risk is in this place, which is why if we're very sensitive to certain triggers, being loud, chaotic crowds, the shopping season before the Christmas holiday isn't comfortable for some people. It just triggers way too much feeling of chaos. Some people love it, right? They can't wait for something that has a giant crowd and lots of noise and music. So when we come to this reappraisal moment, we have a choice. Can I cope? And can I cope comes with, do I have the skills to do it? But also, is there something that is meaningful for me by staying longer in the situation? So the more we avoid the thing that is bothering us, that is close to something we care about, right? I want to be a professional singer, but I'm afraid to do an audition. I am afraid to sing in front of my class. This is where we do this magic dance of appraising the safety, noticing the trigger, and also saying, I can cope with this. My experience in doing the difficult thing, right? Going back to our pyramid, we talk about self-efficacy being right up there, right next to this resilient coping. We reappraise our environment, our situation, to decide, I have these feelings. I am actually not in biological harm. I have feelings of fear, but there is not a high level of danger here. I can cope. And I can take the step forward to me that has deep meaning. And the more we take that step toward deep meaning, which for many of you is becoming a mentor at Free Arts, being involved, expressing your art, sharing your art, taking that risky step and connecting to a deep sense of meaning to you becomes its own comfort. And then the next trigger and the next cue is a little less powerful. And often over time, we can extinguish some of the worst feelings that we have when we keep moving toward the things that we care about, the values, the behaviors, the actions. So in closing, thank you so much for listening. This is probably step one of several when we're going to talk about different ways in which to support the people who do the work here at Free Arts, who are healers, who are caregivers, who care about bright futures for people who've been through adversity and trauma. But we also recognize there's difficulty that sometimes exists in all of us that we take with us. And so I hope you've taken a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of encouragement out of navigating your inner world. If you like this show, Share it, like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Canvas of the Heart. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback by email at hello@freeartsaz.org. You can find more information about Free Arts by visiting our website at freeartsaz.org. We'd like to thank the many individual and corporate donors and the hundreds of volunteers that make Free Arts programs possible. Take care, and we will talk to you soon.